And DD India correspondent Akshay Dongre joins us live with more. Akshay, first take us through the details of how India flagged Pakistan Prime Minister's speech over the issue of terrorism.
Well, it was a systematic, disintegration of all the claims that were made by Shehbaz Sharif at the UNGA. All the false claims from repeated lie by the Pakistani armed forces about the so-called number of downed fighter jets of the Indian Air Force and hiding the sort of casualties that they have made. So, in a conflict, it's natural to have casualties. There is nothing to gloat over that. That is something that a mature nation wouldn't do. But we are talking about Pakistan, so the case is entirely different in this regard. India and the undersecretary at the UNGA clearly dismantled all the lies of Pakistan that were being made at one of the most important multilateral forums in the world. At the United Nations General Assembly, Pakistan Prime Minister came, first of all, he tried to whitewash the crimes of not only the Pakistani, terror outfits, but also the armed forces who have been colluding with the terror groups. So it was important for the world to know that it was not just terrorists who were acting against India. It was a well-defined, and well set up machinery that has an equal stake of the Pakistani armed forces. We saw that in the funerals of the terrorists who were killed, Abdul Rauf and other terrorists were part of it, along with the Pakistani generals who had attended the funerals of these terrorists. The TRF, the Resistance Front, that is also an outfit of, associated with a terror outfit in Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Taiba. They claimed responsibility. It cannot get more clearer than this, that they claimed responsibility once the backlash started from even the local Kashmiris and even from across the world. They tried to wash their hands of it, stating that it was sort of a cyber attack, and their servers got hacked, and all sort of orchestration of another lie started from there. And when India acted decisively and destroyed not only the terror infrastructure, but also the infrastructure of Pakistani armed forces that were trying to defend these terror groups. They were dismantled as well. They were destroyed by the Indian attacks, and all of that has first of all been lied to the Pakistani public, and then to the world by the well orchestrated lies that have been told again and again by the Pakistani armed forces as well as the government.
Back and if you look at the address of the envoy, Akshay, India reiterates at the UN its red lines again against terrorism, no distinction between terrorists and their sponsors.
Well, there have never been distinctions between terrorists and their enablers, their sponsors, because without this kind of money and fund that is coming in, these terror groups cannot work in silos. The entire FATF and the grey lists and blacklist that they make is to stop the funding of the terror groups, because without funding, a terror outfit cannot function. So it's not just the ground workers that are terrorists, but those who are funding them are also equal in killing of the innocent people. We have seen this in the past. After 9/11, we saw how the U.S. armed forces they captured countries. They captured countries they claimed that were supporting terror outfits and were supporting these terror groups who were planning attacks on U.S. soil. Lines have always been clear that there are not going to be any differentiation between the enablers and the ground workers. They are just ground workers. We cannot just call the people who are carrying guns as terrorists, but the ones who are funding them, ones who are supporting them, protecting them, they are equally terrorists in that sense. So that is one thing that had to be reiterated. The world knows it, but when it comes to many of the Western nations, when there are attacks, the people promptly call them terror attacks. But when it is in the countries of the global south, we have seen that, especially from the West, the attitude has been entirely different. And that is something that had to be spoken out loud once again. That was done by India at the UNGA.
A lot of parallel activities at the UN. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar makes a case for multilateralism and BRICS ahead of his speech at the UN.
Well, yes, that was a meeting hosted by the foreign minister for the BRICS foreign minister. So in that meeting, this point was reiterated by India that we should talk about multilateralism. It should just not become an isolated bloc. We should talk about engaging with different partners. We should act as an economic bloc to further the development in the countries and engage with other partners as well. So that was a point that had to be highlighted. Also, in the recent events with the kind of geopolitical churn that is happening, once again we are seeing a sort of a neo Cold War breaking out, and among the biggest countries and the most important nations economically, India is perhaps the only one that is not joining any bloc, or that is again like it did during the non-aligned movement, and it did in the last 10 years in major conflicts. India is once again reiterating multilateralism, dialogue, and diplomacy for furthering the development agenda for the global south.
Looking in its entirety, what would be India's priorities at the 80th session of the UNGA?
Well, our priorities are quite clear, Shubhendu. It's development. It's peaceful environment for development to happen, and that can only happen once terrorism seeks. Terrorism is wiped out. There is peace. There's prosperity. There is freedom of movement. There is no fear among the people from these terror outfits, and the countries that enable it. The countries that are enabling these kind of terror attacks, once they realize that they do not have the capabilities to engage with the adversary militarily, these kind of tactics are used. They're simply blackmail tactics, have to be called out. That is being done by India. But besides terrorism, we also have these conflicts that are going around the world that is threatening the food supply to the global south nations, that is threatening the development of these countries, especially the Russia Ukraine conflict and the conflict that's taking place in the West Asian region. It has devastated countries, killed thousands, and once again, creating a rift among nations, and creating these sort of pools of blocks that are forming now. That is perhaps one of the biggest threat to the world peace at this point. Back to you.
Akshay, thank you for joining us with those updates and insights.